This
who are
conference
now
will
in
now be
Connecticut
recorded.
and working in New York, is that their companies are telling them they're not going back to work in the office for quite some time. I know from my own son, he may be in there once a week now. So I don't think the lots are going to have the same usage even 6 months after the COVID issue is resolved. So, but I'm interested in anybody else's comments on that, just so we have input. So, you know, there's no surprises, should at least come to fruition. So,
Jack, this is Mike. I guess I'm just a little unclear as to what's motivating the MTA in this. This is not on the merits of the lease or anything like that. It's just more, I think, Kate, if I have it right, you said that the MTA wants to relocate some maintenance employees, and that's the consequence. That's the reason why they want to use this space. But what's driving the MTA? Are they looking to decentralize or what?
No, it's all COVID related, to provide appropriate social distancing for their employees. They can't do it in their current facility. So right now, the people who they would locate in Stamford or in Darien. My understanding is that they've been moved from Stamford up to White Plains.
Oh, okay, but I'm still unclear, Kate. What are they proposing to put on it? Like
Trailers.
Trailers.
They're
Okay.
a couple trailers.
Okay, that's what I was missing, was what do they propose to do? They're going to put trailers there. Okay.
Yes.
All right, got it.
Kate, this is Iris. How does this all affect the depot?
It should not. It would be the area closer to the depot, and they would fence the area in, but it would not impact the spaces that the depot has.
And there'd be plenty of turnaround room for people to drop off kids, for like the middle school kids and stuff. Have they been notified that this might be happening?
Yes.
Okay.
Steve, is there any way to negotiate a contingency in case demand for parking comes back sooner than lease expires?
Okay, so this meeting is going to be public, and so I don't want to say everything that is going on in the negotiations.
Understood.
That is absolutely a consideration for us.
And the concern I've heard from a couple of people is, why are we sort of giving? Some people have said, well, we're giving away our parking spots. I know it's not as simple as that, but especially some people said they've waited a long time to get their permits, and now all of a sudden there will be fewer spots.
Well, those wouldn't be permit spaces to begin with. Those are daily spaces. And so one thing that we had considered is, should we end up leasing the space to them, and should demand start picking up before we can get Metro North out? The rear of the Leroy West lot that the town owns, it's the permit lot downtown.
Right.
Okay. The rear of it, like way in the back, not even realize it's there. It doesn't get well utilized. And it seems no matter how many permits we try and sell there, and how many we do sell there, we always have spaces in that back spot available. So we would make those available as daily spaces if we needed to satisfy the demand. I would love to have that problem. I would really love to have the problem that the demand comes back and we need to find parking spaces.
My understanding is both. Jack, I have a question.
go ahead, Stacy, and then Lisa.
So my understanding is P&Z voted against this twice, and Board of Selectmen has not voted on this at all.
So I don't know about twice on P&Z. So I had asked Jeremy if we needed to get a mandatory referral from P&Z, and he thought we did. So I sent the letter and they put it on the agenda. The first time they talked about it, they didn't come to any decision. They asked some further questions. They asked me to come to the meeting. Before that second meeting on the 8th, that afternoon, we learned that we did not need a mandatory referral because it's not town-owned land. But I went to the meeting. They are not in favor of it. And what the mandatory referral is for them to decide is it consistent with the town's plan of conservation and development? Their objections were all about which side of the lot, which side of the tracks we were offering in the lease. they stated specifically that they would be fine with it if we were giving the spots on the post 53 side or in the permit lot. But they felt that those spaces on the depot side were more attractive to our commuters. And that's why they were opposed to it. I'm not really sure that that's within their purview in terms of what they were supposed to decide. And the other thing is, them voting no on a mandatory referral doesn't actually mean that the project stops. It just gives us a higher bar for funding from the RTM. The Board of Selectmen will vote on it when we have a lease, when we have agreed upon lease terms, but we aren't there yet.
And did the board, and you said that the Board of Selectmen gave you permission to negotiate. Did they vote on that?
Yes, yeah. They gave us that permission back in July.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lisa, you had a question?
She answered my question. Thank you.
The one thing I do want to add to this, and I know Kate said that the state doesn't want to take it over.
They could.
Having worked with several people in Stanford, Stanford never had the lease. And therefore, they were always dependent on the state to do any improvements to their railroad, to their stations. And they've had to wait a long time, and they had very little say, if any, in what the state ended up doing when they did improvements on those stations, where we're actually in much greater control because of how we have this parking and have those funds. So I'm just, even though I know the lease still has to be done, there's a lot of negotiation going on. You know, the spaces that we're going to give up on one side is almost equivalent to what we would be giving up on the other side. There is some of the traffic associated with that, on the flow of things going in and out. And I just wouldn't want to give the state an opportunity to decide they're going to do it anyway, and then possibly have somebody look to go and take back the parking lot and put that fully in their control versus having the town control of this. It's just a different perspective for us to consider.
It was one of the reasons why Ed Gentile and I were we were willing to talk to Metro North about it, because our feeling was the state they could go right to the state, and the state could say, yeah, you can have it, and then we would get no funds out of it.
Jack, I have a comment or a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Kate. My question, I don't really have a problem with entering into a lease with the MTA to take advantage of some of our free parking spots. My concern is, you know, the Planning and Zoning Commission, it wasn't just a no, it was an emphatic no. And it was more on the location, and that they'd be ready to endorse it, even though they don't need to for mandatory referral purposes. But I'm curious as to why the other two locations that they brought up that they would, you know, be supportive of were not considered by the Board of Selectmen.
Well, there are a couple reasons. First, to put it on the side where the post is would require blocking off the pathway, the roadway from the post down through the permit lot and up to Hollow Tree Ridge Road. So you would no longer be able to go like from Norotan down Ledge into the parking lot and out to Hollow Tree Ridge Road. So we have a problem with that in terms of the ambulances. And it's not attractive to Metro North because they wouldn't have access to any utilities over there.
And what about the Leroy site?
The Board of Selectmen was opposed to putting it on that property, in large part because of the proximity to residents. The spot, if you think, do you know where I'm talking about in the back of Leroy West? There are a number of homes right around there.
Hey, Jack, I have a comment or question.
Sure.
So I think you made a good point with regard to, you know, if the state wants to use the space, they probably have a right to do it. So it's in our best interest to negotiate in good faith. What occurs to me about this is I know it's supposed to be short-term related. Dang, I'm hearing background noise.
Yeah, hang on a second.
Yeah.
Mike Heights, can you mute yourself? Thank you.
I know this is intended to be a short-term COVID-related placement of maintenance workers, and I understand how this is an ideal location given the access to the main line. But But my sense is it could very easily become a longer term solution. This is a pretty hefty move to put those trailers there, and the utility connects. There's going to be water. There's going to be sewer connect, probably, right, Kate? I don't know for sure, but typically there would be, plus all the internet and things of that nature. And so where to put it is a sensitivity, given it could end up being longer term than just COVID related.
Yeah, part of the consideration for us is the ability to have a termination clause that allows us to get out. And that's going to be one of the, I think, arguments that it could end up stopping the whole thing, is what happens if we decide we want to terminate and they don't, they feel they haven't gotten their return on their investment yet.
Right, or it just proves to be a great location to, with access to the maintenance line.
Right, but we want a termination clause in the
Understood.
that where we get to decide.
Okay, thank you for that, Kate. That's helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Kate mentioned is having had a postie, the fact that, number one, if we think that there's children walking to school also, the fact that they have to go around to Middlesex to get into that lot now because we'd be closing it off increases the traffic in an area that's also having construction done to it. Number two, with the, and I know that it's typically locked during the day, but also with not allowing the ambulance to be able to access that to get to the other side quicker, I think that increases the time for a response to an ambulance, and that also makes it unfavorable for it going to the other side. I mean, those are two things that, for me, say, yeah, it might be nice from a location from that, if you think about it from that, but when you look at the consequences of it, where it is good, and I think with the appropriate termination clause, we'll have to see how it works out, but also we'd be making money where right now we're making nothing, and it's going into the parking fund that will only improve the lot down the road. So, are there any other comments? If not,
yes,
we can move on.
Jack, this is Bert. We know the people who watch this are probably in a majority financial guys. Otherwise, they wouldn't watch F&B. But for their enlightenment, can we just explain to everybody what are the amounts of money involved? And two, why does town councils think that the RTM needs to approve this?
I can answer both of those.
Okay, thank you.
All right. The estimated monthly revenue would be, as I said, $5,500 a month, which was calculated out by the number of spots that were being used as if they were fully occupied at the daily rate for 5 days a week or 20 days a month. And then, somewhat rounded. So that takes care of the finances. That's
Well, Jack,
not to say.
Jack, if I can interrupt, remember the lease terms have not been finalized and agreed upon by either party yet. So that's what we proposed.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm not sure,
fair
I can't
enough.
say that that's where it's going to end up.
Very fair point, Kate. So that was on the term sheet. I myself immediately, when I saw this, asked, because it is leasing back, in theory, a lease that's under the authority of the parking authority, why the RTM was involved. And so I called Wayne to ask why we're voting on this. And Wayne said, to be conservative and in deference to the RTM, because this is property managed by the town, any property that's managed by the town that has a lease on it would be required to have RTM approval. And so that was Wayne's interpretation of the charter. And that's why it will be, after it goes to, I'm assuming, the parking authority first, which really is the Board of Selectmen are also members of the Parking Authority. The Board of Selectmen then coming to the RTM. So that's the answer that I got from Wayne.
Jack, I have a kind of a procedure question.
Sure.
So why, I understand why we're RTM votes on and everything, but like, Kate's saying that this is not really the lease.
Correct.
So why are we voting on a not really lease?
You're not.
We're not voting on it in our next meeting, but I thought since this was still being discussed and negotiated, that it's always better to have input into the members of the town that are negotiating prior to the horse leaving the barn.
Okay,
So we're just having this conversation and then we'll address it. If a lease is done, we'll be addressing it in our October meeting.
Okay, it's just you had said discuss and take action on, so
Well, we were taking action until we knew that there was no lease and hence we couldn't take action. So when the agenda was written, it was anticipation that a lease might be ready.
Okay. It seems like
I have one last question.
this lease, and so
Kate,
while I'm
I
not,
understand.
Wait, I want to hear Iris first. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said, like, I'm not totally opposed to this, even though I'm a little confused of it. I think we can't, I'm not sure why we're discussing it until we have a lease. So. 'cause then we
I
have
just wanted to
components
have
of the
various, I just wanted to make sure that, if there was some concerns expressed by members of the committee on what the term sheet was, that at least Kate was aware of what those concerns were going into finalizing the negotiations. That's the only reason why we were doing this.
And
It does help us because then I can say to Wayne that, this is not going to fly. We can't take that, we can't have that in the lease. It won't fly because I already, have heard that that's not going to be acceptable. So it's helpful to me.
Has Wayne written up something that says why he thinks the RTM can vote on it and that we're allowed to do all this sublease with the state? And it seems to me we ought to have some sort of, besides just making the lease, foolproof, is there should, maybe it's out there. I'm just asking. Y'all could have already done all this work. I don't know, but
I'm sure he has, he can give it to me. I know it was in chapter 43. He told me what section. I just didn't copy it down. But I can ask Wayne to provide that for the RTM.
And that we're allowed to sublease the state property issue.
That I think he believes we can do, because otherwise they wouldn't have been negotiating.
Well, I know, but is he written out some documentation, something for us to read that says this is
We can ask him to do that.
You see what I'm saying? I just want,
we'll ask him to do that.
Okay.
Well, we'll do that. We'll get that. It's a good point, Iris. We'll get it done.
And even if the lease right now is not clear that we have the right to or the parking commission has the right to sublease, they can get an acknowledgement from the state grant clarifying that we have the right, or an estoppel of some sort, as I would expect. So it's a good question, though, Iris.
Yes, I think so as well.
Kate, this is Mike. Just in the spirit of what Jack said about this is an opportunity for you to take some input from the committee to inform your negotiations. I guess one kind of just maybe one related question I have, and that comes from being a decade-long commuter from Norotan Heights. That is, I'm certainly aware, as I know you are, that the waiting list for the annual passes permits has gone on for years for some folks. And I'm just curious as to whether that waiting list and what's happening in that regard to the demand or lack thereof for parking right now has figured in, if at all, to these negotiations.
No, because this is not a permit lot that we're talking about, so it hasn't factored into it at all.
Well, I guess I know you said that, but I'm just thinking that, I look at all these spaces of being available as kind of, in the mix. And if you, as I read this, understand this, if you take offline a number of spaces, albeit even vouchered spaces, does that relate to the waiting list issue? That's all. And is the waiting list still as long as it has been, or do you expect that waiting list demand to taper off a bit?
You know, it's a really good question. And at this time, we were talking about the waiting list renewal recently. We don't know what will happen with the waiting list. It is pretty much as long. It was culled about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and the numbers were drastically reduced when we started putting in the annual renewal fee. But since that renewal fee went in place, it stayed pretty steady. You know, the numbers and the movement off of it.
All right.
In fact, while we're here, and if anybody did not listen to Monday's Board of Selectmen meeting, there was a proposal, I believe, Kate, on the renewal of certain, on the parking vouchers. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I had given them a list of options to consider related to the 2021 renewals for permits. Considering that the parking lots have been largely unused since March, I wanted the Board of Selectmen to think about what they wanted to do, if they wanted to extend the 2020 permits. If so, for how long? Did they want to go ahead with a regular renewal? Did they want to do refunds, reduce rates? So I expect at their next meeting on the 28th, they will be voting to extend the expiration date for the 2020 permits to March 31st of 2021, and then do a renewal, a 9-month renewal. So we would prorate the renewal fee for 2021.
So I just, so that people are aware, I thought it was a good opportunity since that was discussed at the Monday meeting. If there's no further comments on this.
I have a question. And
Sure.
Sorry. Thank you, Kate. I ran out of battery, so I don't know if somebody touched on this. What about some like externalities that this may cause? For example, I have heard some instances during normal times that people have been parking at the heights where the Darien Housing Authority is, because probably they just don't want to pay, but they have been cases that people are parking there, and this may cause, probably if things get normalized, more demand, and people will continue or will be more pushed to continue doing that behavior.
Well, that's, you know, that has happened, and it's happened before this, but that's part of why it's important for us to have some termination clauses that allow us to deal with if the demand comes back and we need those spaces for parking, we need to be able to get them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Kate, it's Martha. I have a question, and I definitely agree you need termination clauses. I guess the one question I would ask Wayne Fox is, I mean, how ironclad would the termination clause be? I mean, it's property that's not ours, and you know, I mean, people rent things. It's very difficult to evict people. It takes months and months sometimes. So,
well, yeah, you know, it's going to be interesting because you know, it's almost like a three-way deal because of the state's involvement. So with some of the from our discussions with the state DOT, with some of what we would like to get in terms of the termination clauses, I think the state is on our side. But you know what? I mean, here's the thing: we don't need to lease this. You know, it will bring in revenue where we're not getting any revenue. It's not going to be enough to replace what we've lost in the parking fund. So I feel like we're a bit in the driver's seat that we can walk away easier than they can. So if we don't like the terms, you know, I'm going to see the selectmen saying, you know, no, that doesn't work for us. We're not doing it.
Okay.
And again, you know, as Kate mentioned, using the Leroy lot for day parking, if it's required, because it's going to take some timing for the MTA to move out and those spaces to be put back in use, that is an option. I also do believe that We're not going to, contrary to what some people in this country think, we're not going to wake up one day, have the coronavirus totally cured, and everybody back to work as if everything was in February. So, this is going to take some time for things to evolve, and that will give us a great deal of opportunity to work things out as necessary in a good manner, should this lease occur and things be resolved. All right, can we go to...
One more quick thing. Since everybody seems to be, this whole state thing is confusing, is that and maybe this will be part of Wayne's write-up about what, his legal point of view is, that could the state, like we say it's a 2-year term and we can get out of it. Can the MTA and the state do a run around us where the MTA then goes to the state, and then the MTA and the state agree that the MTA pays the state money and the state keeps them there? Like, I think there's a little bit of, it's just a little messy in that area.
Yeah, I believe that once we sign the lease, it would be hard for them to do that. But before we sign a lease, yes, they could do that.
But why couldn't they do it when our lease ends?
When the lease ends?
Yeah.
Yeah, they could do that. The state owns the lot, and we don't have an active lease with the state. The lease expired back about 10 years ago. So the state could at any time come in and take over those lots.
So even if we put you got to get out at the end of our clause, if the MTA goes to the state, they could work a deal, and then they're stuck. Then they're still there with all their stuff. So maybe we don't open this door.
I'd have to ask Wayne for that specifically.
That's what I'm saying though. Like, once you get things there, and I don't know. I mean, do we want all of that stuff sitting there for the next 10 years?
It occurs to me, if we have no lease on the property currently, as part of the negotiations, it would seem like we would negotiate a lease so that we have a control for some period of time, to Iris's point. Otherwise, what rights do we have to do anything before, during, or after this sublease to the MTA?
Yeah, we can try that, Mark. We tried. We can try again, but the state hasn't seemed interested in renewing leases with anybody, not just us.
Agreed.
I do want to go in here and say this hasn't, renegotiating the lease that occurred before is not something that the town has just said, okay, you don't want to do it, so we're not going to do it. It's been something that's been tried for an ongoing basis. However, there is certain legal concepts here that says, since we've been operating it, and the state most likely will have to approve this lease.
Yeah, they do.
Therefore, during the term of the lease, they can't do an end around, or they're in violation of a lease that they signed. So at least during the period of the lease, the end around isn't going to occur.
Jack,
because they've also approved the terms.
I'm concerned about it. What happens at the end of the lease? That's
if it's still necessary. I mean, one of the things you have to think about is this isn't the only location. The MTA is losing millions of dollars. They're not going to just keep, if they don't need their employees sitting in Darien paying $60,000 a year, when they're trying to figure out if they're not cutting staff and service, on how many trains go on, how many times does it go through a subway, how many trains do we have going through on an annual basis. Believe me, $60,000 lease on a little bit of property is out of there quicker than you can count your change in your pocket. It's just going to be gone. They're going to take it out. It costs too much. So you have to also consider that side. It's not that the MTA is in great financial shape right now. So I just want to throw that in because that's the other side of it. They don't want to have to pay this. They're paying this because they can't keep the social distancing and keep their workers safe and sound and still operate. So That's why they've approached us in other communities. All right, can we go to number 3 on our list? The STEEP grant. Kate, do you want to give an overview? It's a lot, you'll be a lot more succinct than I would.
Okay. About 2 months ago, we were notified that the state was reviving the Small Town Economic Assistance Program grant. And they were accepting applications. The deadline was August 28th. We could apply for up to $128,205. We had to have, there has to be some sort of town funds matching. They didn't specify an amount. But because of that, we felt we had to go with some projects that were ready to go, where we already had money available. It wasn't time for us to look at new projects and get an appropriation for our part of it and then apply for it. The grant does require that a legislative body, the RTM, accept the grant if it's awarded to us, that they would have to accept it within 30 days of the award, which is why we're here with you tonight, asking for this to be approved next Monday, even though we don't know if we're getting the grant. So we took a look, the first selectman and I met with Ed Gentile and Pam Geary to talk about projects that they had going that would fit within the parameters within the guidelines. And we took a look at what was there. And then in reviewing the application form, one of the, Jack, you're getting a lot of noise from here.
Yeah, my chair was creaking.
Okay. One of the points in the application was, did our project, was it consistent with the state's plan of conservation and development, which is what led us to make our application for the landscaping and pollinator pathway at Highland Farms, because it was the one project we had that best did that. We had talked about possible sidewalks because they were looking at infrastructure things that were transit oriented. We talked about the basketball court at Cherry Lawn, but the Highland Farms was the one that really you could pick out a piece of the state's plan of conservation and development and say, yes, this fits in with it. So that's where we ended up with that. So we applied for a grant of $92,000. The $92,000 was based on a budget that was developed by the landscape architect that had been working on the design already. And so the application was submitted, and we are now waiting to hear.
I believe I sent out the detail of the plans. The architect, this is again coming from Monday's meeting. The architect will be meeting with the close neighbors to present what he has in the past, but he will do it again, my understanding is?
Yes, yes.
So, so he has taken input. He will be meeting with them again with what plans he's come out. I mean, if you look at it, there's a significant number of trees, shrubs, and other things that are being done. Not everything.
I think what you sent out was preliminary. That's,
yeah.
Yeah.
So, so he will again meet with the neighbors. It will then go to a public hearing. This was discussed. You know, I'm not sure that it's gonna perfect, but hopefully it will have a majority of the neighbors satisfied. We get very little money from the state, so anytime we can get a grant from them to take care of this, that's fine. And I kind of look at it as this is a very good first step. And if there are still concerns that might need to be addressed after this is implemented, you know, getting another 20, 30,000 to fix it up is fine to do to it. But something's going to need to be spent there to go and address some of the landscaping that was always planned for that. And hence, why not get it from the state? Plus, I like pollination highways. So just that's just my approach to it. Jenny, I know you want to say something, so go ahead.
No, I'm fully, I think it's great. I think the steep grant looked great. I did talk to all the neighbors who met with Weston and Sampson, and each one of them walked the property individually with Dan Biggs. And I think one of the neighbors, Suzanne Schutte, had forwarded sort of a collaborative document that shows what the neighbors were thinking about. I actually think it was the majority of their comments were really for the benefit of the property. Some of the neighbors had specific requests with regard to landscaping, with the fact that some of the headlights are going to shine right into their kitchen windows. So they were looking at screening for that. I couldn't tell from the schematics in the steep grant where those were, what the screening was, and I'm not sure if it even addressed the screening of the parking lots, because I don't know if those are just pollinator pathway gardens
No, well, what we had, the picture of those kind of things that were shown in the application, and those going around the parking lots. The pollinator, actually, those drawings were not the pollinator pathway at all. Those were showing the different kinds of, if you did full screening or partial screening of the parking lots, what it might look like. So the plan, as it gets further developed, and what I've seen so far, involves a lot more than even just the parking lots. There's potential for trees around in certain spots around the walking trail, trees around the perimeter of the property as the older trees that are there now die off, to be planting in preparation for that, so that the new ones would grow up and kind of replace those. So I think there's an awful lot we can do there, and it will depend on time and money.
So my question is, can you not start the planting before you get the steep? Like, do we have to use the steep grant now in advance, or can we if we start it now, can we be reimbursed? Because I know we're going up against fall planting, or is this now a spring project?
No, well, the steep grant is supposed to be awarded mid-September, so we're there. We should be hearing soon, but no, we can't be reimbursed.
Okay, so you have to wait for the money, get it, spend it.
Yes.
It may make the fall planting, but you may not.
May not.
Okay, and then as far
our
as
goal would be to, if we get it, to start as soon as possible. And that was actually one of the questions from the state, was how soon would you start?
Right. And then, as far as the public hearing, to invite the neighbors and residents, anyone else who wants to come look at the plan, that's probably, I'm guessing that Weston and Sampson's pretty close to getting a finished plan together. And
yeah,
when do you expect that?
We didn't get specifics on the dates, but it looked like it was pretty close to being done when I saw it about a week ago.
I have a quick question. I guess my question, taking this grant money, if we get it, is it saving the town money, or is it in addition to money we would otherwise have spent?
Good question. So let me answer it this way. If we don't get the grant, we're going to be asking for town money.
That answers the question. Thank you.
So, Kate, so this is not in the budget, and if we don't get the grant, you're going to come back to us and ask us for the money, even though it's not in the budget.
I will probably ask for it in the next budget.
Okay, because I personally, if we don't get the grant for it, we spent a lot of time having a lot of things cut this year, and I don't think this is something you should come back to us this year and ask for.
I agree.
I mean, one, it hasn't been vetted. The public hasn't really had a chance to look at it. Two, it's a lot of money. And I think I'm still not real clear why you picked this project when there's lots of other projects that are in the budget that we could have reimbursed. But that, I'm not going to go there. I just want to say I would be very upset to have somebody come back and ask us for more money this year if you don't get the grant.
Yeah, we picked this project based on the guidelines that the state put out there for a steep grant. They're very specific. So it's not something that we could have, we couldn't ask to go and buy the police cars with it.
No, but you can fix
Also,
up other parks. You can fix up other parks with it.
But it
Well,
had to be something that we had money already available for our match. And there wasn't anything, we looked at playground equipment. We gave that consideration. We looked at the Cherry Lawn basketball court, but it was also in considering that the state was interested in the project meeting their, being consistent with their plan of conservation and development, and what was the one that was going to be, most appealing to them as, selling it to them.
That's
And
cool.
is
I hope
that
you get the money.
some
That's
sort
something
of like that? I'm sorry.
we should fund this year if you were going to come back and ask this year.
Doesn't it work like that? They give us a grant if we can match it?
No, the match is just, we have to have some town money involved in the project. They didn't say
Okay.
how much.
And so
we already have
we
money
can
involved.
allocate that from somewhere else.
I'm sorry, Bert, I didn't hear the full question.
We could allocate that from somewhere else. We just have to prove to the government that we have the funds to match.
Right. We have funds, period.
Okay.
Right.
And this is
And
a
we already
project
paid
from
some.
last year. So I think Iris, if this helps, Highland Farm got approved the 609,000 last year for the parking lots and what was the whole plan under the special permit approval. So, which included screening. So that's probably, this is sort of I view this as a completion of a project that was already approved last year, and now the landscaping's the last to go in.
Yes, and I would agree with you, Jenny. I would also say two other things. The town has spent some money on it, on developing the plan. So that is the out-of-pocket that the town has already put towards it. Number two, as Kate mentioned, sometimes you have to put forward to the state something that you think will be the most acceptable to the state. And since we were going to spend some money on it anyway, putting in something that gives us the most acceptable and then not having to spend, because the town gets very little from the state, is a very wise approach to try and convince the state to give Darien something.
No, it's just that I don't misunderstand. If this is a worthwhile project, and if the state gives us money for it, yeehaw. But I just don't know if we should be, if we lose out to it for whatever reason, and who knows what the state, we can't control that, then I'm not sure if it's something that we should be looking to fund this year with a special RTM vote. That's all I'm saying.
We're not intending to come with a special request during the year.
I agree with Iris on that.
22 budget request.
Okay, I just wanted to put that out. And I mean, I think
Okay.
Highland Farm, anything you make beautiful is great, and especially if the state pays for it. But that's.
Could I just understand the figures? 8,700, is that what we're paying the architect for the design?
Yes.
Okay, and then the 90 something, that's the estimated cost of the greenery and whatnot?
Yes.
Okay.
So what we are approving, if we're ready to vote, is approving the steep grant as it was presented to the town, to the state. We are not approving the spending of $92,000 if the grant money does not come in. We are only approving that they approve that the grant that was submitted is okay. That way, if we do get the money, they don't have to come back to the RTM within 30 days of getting the funds to get an approval. It also allows for the work to start sooner and not being reliant on the RTM. So are we ready to vote?
Jack, are you going to ask for no's and abstentions?
Well, first I need a motion to move this. So who wants to motion? I see Stacy. I don't see everyone, so somebody speak up. I need a second on that.
Luisa Brackman.
Okay, Louisa?
Okay. We got a second. I'll first ask for the no's. Are there any no's? Hearing none, are there any abstentions? Hearing none, I will assume that it passes unanimously. Mike, just out of curiosity, how many people do we have here?
14.
Okay, so 14 in favor.
Yep, that's right.
The next part, item 4, is the authorization of the CT Municipal Coronavirus Relief Fund submission. There was some expenses on the first submission that totaled approximately 80,000 plus. The town would be potentially capable of getting 75% of that, which would approximate 60,000. However, based upon our allocation of what the state is willing to give us, we're at a different number. Wait, let me get to my paper. The number that we are being allocated is $40,282 in the first grant. Kate, do you want to add anything to that? I
No?
mean, it's a $40,000 item.
Yeah, this is more Jen's than me, so she gave me the information. I can try and answer questions if you have anything, but this has all been very complicated because we have to wait for the FEMA approvals before we can submit to the state, and FEMA's being very slow. So it's been very complicated, and Jen and Mark McCune have worked very hard on this.
Yeah, and then
Jack, I have
Bert.
a boring accounting question. So when we spend that kind of money, we keep track of it as COVID-related expenditures.
Yes.
They're segregated on our books. We want to keep track of them. We don't know if we're going to get reimbursed or not, but they're tracked separately.
Yes.
After that, I guess they still are part of the general expenditures in the previous budget year, even though we hope we might get reimbursed, but we don't have a receivable or anything that we can capitalize. So we know we expended it last year, and it's going to be an income item for the receipt from the state.
It'll be an income item in the current year.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
As I said, the state has gone through for all of the communities, and based upon the type of community, some get greater funding than we do from this. This is the cap amount that we have. So we're just approving the submission and the acceptance of the $40,000 grant. Are there any other questions associated with this? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? So if we're ready to vote, I need somebody to move
Stacey's
this.
trying to say something, I think.
Okay, Stacy, sorry.
Do we have a quick rundown of what these expenses?
I don't have the details on them.
Hang on a second.
What I do have is
Jack,
that
I
it,
do.
okay,
We had a lot of cleaning supplies, around $8,000. We had some equipment, IT equipment, about another $2,000. A lot of legal fees because the state kept sending out executive orders that had to be interpreted and opined on. All the modifications we made, I know you haven't all been in town hall, but if you were to go around to the offices, we've had to put up shields where the public may come in and shields between employees' workspaces if they can't be safely distanced. So we've had to do a lot of that. We've had to do some, this car cleaning, particularly for the police if, you know, somebody had bloodborne pathogens and stuff, clean those. Then there was overtime and PPE, lots of PPE.
I will get a breakdown from Kate
Thanks,
on that.
Kate. At a Board of Finance,
I'm
thanks,
sorry.
Kate. At a Board of Finance meeting this summer, oh, sorry. At a Board of Finance meeting this summer, they talked about how the legal expenditures were $45,000. Can you talk to that a little?
Yep, they were. I think you all are aware of, you know, because of what happened with the budget, that it was there was a lot of legal interpretation that we requested. It wasn't just that, it was, you know, did we have the authority to do things like close the beaches? What were going to be the impacts of closing parks and, you know, prohibiting non-residents from coming to parks? What rights did the first selectman have in terms of executive orders? What could she do? What could she order? So there was an awful lot of legal expenses.
It was like 55,000, right? For the
45.
Oh.
As I said, there's a total of $80,000 that have been submitted. And even with that, our cap was going to be about 75%, which would have had us in the $60,000 range, but our cap is 40. So out of the, at least in the first submission, the $80,000+ we're only getting reimbursed for about 40,000 of it. And part of that has to do with the wealth of the town, quite honestly. Any other questions?
Jack, just a point of clarification. This is Mike. I misspoke. There are 15 on the call, not 14. I had a latecomer. That did not count.
All right, super, thank you. All right, can I have somebody move this motion to approve the submission to the state of Connecticut for Receiving Care Act funds? Can somebody move that, please?
I'll move it, Jack. It's Lisa.
That's Lisa. Do I have a second?
I'll second, Jack. It's Mark.
Mark.
Thank you.
Are there any no's? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, I'm assuming that it passes unanimously. Okay, I'm going to be quick on what's going on in the reserve fund for review. A team has been put together, including Dan Bumgardner, Taylor Carter, Jim Palin from the Board of Finance. I was invited to participate in this, and Jen has done some really outstanding work in reviewing not just the capital account, but also some of the reserve accounts that are outstanding. There's 3 that are, one would consider non-operational. They include the purchase of land fund, $100,000 that's been sitting out there for some time in the special ed fund, and one other small fund. In addition, At yesterday's Board of Finance meeting, they decided which accounts were closed down. There is a suggestion, which is something that F&B had made in the past, to look at this at least twice a year, one in September, one in March, so that monies can be moved for projects that are closing out in the next 6 months into the capital Board of Finance reserve account, or contingency rather. After the closeouts, and some of these, most of them had to do with projects being estimated for more than what they actually cost. And, if something's, spent 90%, even 85%, that's not too much of a problem. But when you're getting below that amount, that means we have overtaxed our citizens. So that's something that the Board of Finance will look at more closely during the next budget cycle, as well as us. But it does move the contingency account back up to 800,000 on approximately less than $4 million worth of capital items, of which the largest of which is a $1.8 million fire engine fund. So that's a high percentage of contingency on the active balances that are there. So one of the things that I think is an appropriate way to look at this is to first decide what things should have some of these accrual accounts. What are the parameters for that? What are parameters for what should have its own standalone capital project, the one-off? What are some of the, I call it policy or guidance for the contingency account in this account, and when should funds be moved to either allocated to other projects that might be coming up, or allocated to pay for certain capital projects in the next fiscal year. So those are things that the group is working on, and hopefully we'll have a couple more meetings and come to it. I will try and get out some of the documents that Jen has put together. They're very good. They include looking at the details of what's going on. I sent to the members of the committee, because we talked about it, is there's about 40,000 in the Board of Ed budget for maintenance and repairs on buildings. So I asked the Board of Ed to provide detail on what they had spent over the last 3 years. They did. There is a big difference here, because the Board of Ed, as long as something is within their category, can move funds from one part of the budget to another. Kate in the Board of Selectmen side doesn't have that same capability. So while there may be a maintenance account, whether or not that resides in the capital account or whether or not it resides in the budget is something to be discussed. But it's something that it's important to understand the differences between how the Board of Ed can move money around and how over a certain dollar limit, Kate can't and the town can't. So we have to have funds out there to make things happen. So that's just the minor update. As I get more information, I'll pass it on to the committee.
Could I
Do
ask
we have any? Go ahead.
It's my idle projects carryover. Is that the projects are considered complete and this is the funds left after completion of the project?
No,
is that how I interpret?
No, it's actually two things. And I'll give the example on both sides of the two budgets. So we've asked for some roofs to be done on schools. We approve a budget in May, June. the roof isn't going to be repaired that summer, so it gets carried over to the next summer. And on some of the roofs, we needed some additional work done before the roofs could be repaired for the schools. So those are the idle projects that are being carried over. They're still live projects. They're just taking longer than the typical time of what would happen there. The other project, the really big one, is, and I thought Ed Gentile did a great job explaining that last year, is that we're working on the 2 of the window bays in the gymnasium. I think one's 70,000, the other one was in the neighborhood of 110,000 without having the numbers directly in front of me. And he sought funds in the first year, and then he got additional funds for in this current year's budget, because he realized that it would be easier to work on both projects at the same time. So rather than working on the first project, that's one of the idle projects that's going, that was carried over. Because of COVID, he hasn't been able to start. And we know that he will eventually go for the big glass wall in the gymnasium and town hall that has to be done. Those aren't included in it. So that's a phase where he's combining 2 together. So the project is considered to still be live. It's just its start date has not occurred yet.
Okay, so that's an idle, and the other project purchases carryover, same thing. It's a carryover. And I thought these were to be able to be closed, but not. Okay.
Right. Now, there is some conversations on, there will be some big discussion on what's going on with the, the fire engines. I know that during the discussion of where the town funds were, that in the unaudited side, it appears that we have $8 million of funds in the general fund, but I've pointed out we really have more than 8 million. We have almost 10 million, because if we're not buying a fire engine, we have $1.8 million sitting in that fire engine fund that could be moved in the case of an emergency to be used elsewhere in town. We also have 800,000 sitting in the contingency in that capital account that could also be. So we may be up at 11 million. And so, those are some of the things that we have to consider, as well as, I'm going to say at this time, 250,000 in the Board of Finance contingency. So when you add up all of these various extra funds, the town has more, even though we might not be calling it that at this time. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I guess I was thinking in the instance of projects are closed out and sometimes they're done for less. Have we got any of those listed, or will they be swept back? I guess that's what I was thinking.
They closed out, and I don't have it sitting right in front of me.
Oh, that's fine, but
I think there was about 400,000, and they closed out about 380,000 and projects net. A couple were over, but more were under. And they moved that $380,000 into the capital Board of Finance contingency account, which moved it from about $400,000 to almost $800,000. And there's some more that'll probably be closed out between September and March, which, if closed out, could probably add another $100,000 in there. And so that's why I'd like to see a little bit of a guidance or policy, similar to what the Board of Finance did on the general fund of setting up the range of what that should be. But I think on approximately $2.5 million of capital, having 800,000 or 33% is a little bit high, to say the least. And some of those funds could be returned to the taxpayer.
yeah, well, I think, your point that they should examine the capital funds a couple of times a year, including in March, before you finalize the budget. So if there's some funds that can be swept back so that you don't have to tax people for some of these projects, because there's some funds that aren't going to be used and can be brought back to the general fund. I think that's very important.
Yeah, or at least reallocated to new capital projects that are
Or
being proposed.
reallocated. That's fine too.
Yeah, I would agree.
Uh,
So,
Jack, I had a couple questions. One, how was the committee formed, and why wasn't a member from the Board of Selectmen on this committee, specifically David Martin, who's been a member of FNB? He's the one who flagged this on the Board of Selectmen, and to be a true collaboration as this sits on the Board of Selectmen's budget.
we don't have anybody from the Board of Ed either, and many of these projects are also Board of Ed projects. I did not form the committee. I am happy that they included me on the committee. And that's better a question to be asked of the, of the Board of Finance than of myself. It was discussed at one of their meetings, and it was mentioned that F&B should be involved, so I got involved.
And then, Jack, the accounts that they closed, that they talked about last night at the Board of Finance, they rolled into the reserve, the Board of Finance reserve, rather than the general fund. Do you have
That's
an
correct.
understanding?
That's where it goes there every year. And that's, and that's to pay for should projects be over and under. But, with all due respect for our larger projects, for building and other things like that, the process that was established by Jamie, Kate, and Jen, which was first used on the Public Works garage that had built-in contingencies in that, has eliminated the need to have significant capital Board of Finance contingencies, in my opinion, because the structure of how we do those projects now is vastly improved from what was done in the past, at least the process-wise. So on that, that's where it's going, but that's again why I'm suggesting that the Board of Finance needs to come up with some guidance, because it's not necessarily a policy, on what the contingency can be used for, how it can be used, and when it's appropriate, what's the measures to go on. And we changed the general fund to be done on revenues. Maybe this should be done on the number of smaller projects, not including vehicles. So, and then come with the guidance of what the percentage should be. I have my thoughts, but the committee the group has not addressed that yet.
Stacy, accounting wise, putting it into the reserve fund contingency is the right first step. If you wanted it to be moved into the general fund, that takes more steps. Not that it can't be done, but I think if what you'd want to, the easier way to do it would be watching the budget next year, and if they're not using that contingency, that's where you'd want to say, you have this contingency available to fund the capital projects that you're approving. Why tax for it when you have this available to do some of it?
And I believe we did that in this last budget, which was good. But again, having some guidance always is helpful to set the criteria so that, it becomes a little bit more predictable also for the two boards when they're planning their capital, that some of it may in fact not be taxed.
I'm with Jack on that. Sometimes in this audience, I remind people how you do it in the business world. And really, there's two contingency accounts that you set up. One is a general contingency, say 5% of your project, because some of the stuff is not going to come in exactly like you expected. And the other is to have a specific line item contingency where you say, if this happens, fine. If it doesn't happen, this is the amount we have in the contingency. So it's clearly identified. I don't think we're doing this often enough. That's just my comment.
I think the group will get there. Let's put it that way. And again, another big conversation is going to be is, does the town change the methodology that was originally devised in the mid-90s on funding fire engines when the when the municipal rate was someplace in the 4 and 5% range versus the lower rate now. If you look at the schedule that was prepared, 7, 8 years down the road, if all the fire engines currently being in-house are being replaced, the schedule would have some accruals in the $1 to $2 million range, which is very high to hit the Board of Selectmen budget at that time. And yet, my own thought, and I worked with Jenny on this a little bit, if we decided to bond those, I think that based upon the number of vehicles that we have, 15, based upon the average cost, and when their replacement schedule be, again, assuming everything gets replaced as is, the estimated annual bond payment fee would not ever be more than about $600,000. And at the same time, it might add someplace in the neighborhood of between 7 to 10 million to our total debt picture, depending upon whether, what we were going to pay it down as, whether or not we're doing 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years. I mean, the things do last 20 years. So, so that's probably going to be the biggest conversation, because that's a major hit. That's $1.8 million. And the $5 million that was deferred this year, is still on the table for next year. So it's something that we should address prior to getting the budget done. And, with all due respect, Kate and everybody's really already working on their next year's budget. So anyway, any other questions, or do we have any minutes to approve, Mike?
Yes, we do. The minutes from June 4th.
Okay, do I have a motion to?
They were circulated a couple days ago.
I see Stacy's making a motion to approve the minutes.
You.
Do I have a second? Iris, I see your hand raised. That was even before it came up. Are there any no's to it? Mike takes such good notes, I'm assuming there are no corrections. So
there are a couple typos, Jack, full disclosure, but they've been duly noted.
Okay. All right. So are there any no's? Are there any abstentions? Seeing none, the minutes carry. Do I have a motion to adjourn? And Mike, if you haven't been watching the game, the Yankees are up 7-0.
Oh, you've made my day.
I have Gamecast on while I'm doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Mark, I'll say Mark did it. Stacy second.
Okay.
Have a
Got
good
it.
time,
Thank you all.
everyone. Be safe. Stay well.
Nice to see you.
Thank
you, Kate.
Good to see everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you, Kate.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Night.
All right.
Bye.